So Eileen, why do you think that you have been involved in so many international disputes based here in London?
Yeah, I think we're really fortunate. I think it's CEDA in terms of a lot of international contract clauses, and also the number of people I've worked with who've actually also been trained by CEDA. So CEDA's worked now in over 50 countries. So there's an incredible trust in the process. And the early cases at CEDA were nearly all international, and maybe it was because I was an international lawyer before I founded CEDA. And it's been amazing, but I think the most interesting and some of the most exciting cases are the truly international ones, and quite often they come even before there's any litigation or arbitration.
And what makes them so interesting from a mediator's perspective?
I think it's about the people, actually. I was thinking, going back in time, one of the really brilliant, I was in New York at the time, actually, and I got a call, and could I deal with this problem, which was a power plant in Central America, and the problem with it was business interruption, and their financing came out of New York, and the warranties for the plant came out of Holland, and so we came back into London, and we had 3 days in London with about 50 people, and they were all the different elements, but it was, at moments it seemed quite fraught. I think a lot of the policies were actually in Spanish, which wouldn't be a challenge for you, James, but it was a slight challenge for me. But it was fascinating. And one of the interesting things there was the clients are actually, I think people underestimate how sophisticated. I mean, these people have, like people I've worked with, they're all at the kind of, they understand their businesses, they're under pressure, they've often, they've traveled the world, they often speak 2 or 3 languages, and it's just so exciting to work with these people. And I think as a mediator, the thing you've got to really focus on, it doesn't really matter whether it's governed by Spanish law, New York law. The job of the mediator in these kind of scenarios is actually about the business angle. And the power plant one, it was all about calculations and how to get that right and how to create an environment that there were things that needed to be resolved. And then it was about the insurers and about the people who had given the warranties who weren't there. And we did as a team, we did an amazing job in 3 days.
You mentioned issues of language, which brings in the cultural aspects inherent in these types of disputes. Any reflections on sort of managing those sort of cultural issues in an international dispute?
Well, you're always thinking about that and kind of, but not wanting to make assumptions. So it's, what are these different people like? And I think it's about getting to know people, really. So it's very, very important to really I enjoy people. Yeah. So but I think had a high degree of respect, and you're trying to build trust. So you're trying to do that in every mediation, but I think, so it is very much about trying to understand who the people are, what their culture is. So with I was working with some Germans many years ago, and the lawyers said, be very careful, Eileen, it's very important that, you call him Mr. Schmidt. And the other team were American, and I remember he had a good sense of humor, and he said to me, I don't really care. You can call me, let's make his name up, John. Everybody else can call me Mr. Smith. So, he and I developed a rapport and a relationship quite quickly. But there were issues in that mediation where I remember the American was fluent in German, and he wanted to have time on his own with the other client, and that was fine. But actually, as I anticipated and watched from the body language through the glass doors, it didn't go well. Yeah. So, I had to fast track and bring it back on side again. So, we've got these issues even of communicating in the same language. Did that create a better bridge?
Yeah, and I think what you're saying is the same as my experience, is that you use your mediator skills in terms of developing rapport and engaging and developing a working relationship. Yeah. There will be a cultural overlay, but as long as you're conscious of that, and then you respond in the now, right?
Yeah, and I think absolutely, and I think just finding out at the right moment, finding out where what people's experiences, and I find people are very willing to share about, that is part of building rapport with them, to understand their kind of business culture, a bit about their life experiences. And in the course of a mediation, if you develop that kind of relationship, you do share information about people's personal backgrounds, business experiences. That's part of creating an environment where people can really feel more relaxed and able to actually make progress.
So that's talking about the people aspect of these types of cases. What about the process in terms of how you run the process? Is there anything particularly which you do differently or which requires a different angle on it in terms of managing the process for you?
I think what's interesting, well, say what's different. So I suppose that brings to mind something I was asked to do that had been mediated in America, and they came over here and they booked about 3 days to work in London. And I was thinking about the benchmark of how the Americans would do this, but not going to let that disturb how I was going to approach it. And there were multiple issues, and I just, what I did for those clients was, obviously, as you always do, I had to engage with the lawyers and talk to them about the background to the whole thing, but it was very important to me to develop agendas, and so I did a lot of work to develop process agenda of how we might manage everything, but also to develop substance agenda as well. And in this case, the lawyers hadn't exchanged any information with each other, so there was an awful lot to work through. And I could see the Americans watching and being a little bit surprised, in fact very surprised, but in that particular case I made decisions and took complete control of the process as to who would speak, when they would speak, and how we would actually go through things. And so I knew there was a high degree of skepticism, but the end game, and that's all that matters in the end really, is where is the end game? The end game was totally successful. A lot of interesting things that happened over the course of those 3 days. But I think for the Americans, they were very pleasantly surprised and actually almost very grateful to have pretty strong intervention in terms of creating a process. And actually a lot of working with them. I think we hear a lot about in the Americans now not working in open session. And I suppose that is a good bridge for me to something I was working on, for example, this week actually with clients from Africa and from the continent. That as soon as those clients are flown into London, and I spent an hour and a half with the clients first, talking to them about the background to the problem of this particular issue, and then developing with them how we might work through the day. So it's never a set piece.
And I know you believe quite strongly in preparation in all your cases. And my experience in international cases, even more focus in preparation, particularly on working through process and process design.
So I think one of the big interesting things about the international cases is that clients have flown in, so they've made an effort, and they actually are not going to waste their money and fly into London with a team unless they're going to get a result. So deep respect for the fact they've done that, and that means you need to really put the work in. So whether it's understanding what how the power outage calculations are done, even if they are the policies in Spanish, find out a way to get to the clauses and get them translated. Really try and understand what's going on, but understand the business perspective. And I think I've had a lot of support from clients saying actually they're really very, very pleased that you have shown the respect to make an effort and to really get on side with what their business issues are. So I think that's really critical.
And what about the other end, in terms of actually getting a settlement, getting them to sign up at the end of the day? Is there any sort of reflections on different aspects of how to get that settlement?
Yeah, so again, it always changes. So thinking about the something I was working on some years ago with, it was pipelines off South America. The clients flew in, and we had one in-house lawyer, and all the external lawyers, Magic Circle firms, they decided they weren't coming to the mediation. They'd only booked a day, but and it was very much having to build trust and build the process and build the kind of conversations around this problem. And when we got, a lot of it was also about public relations and how the message was going to go out and how the relationship was going to be developed. So we did, we had to do a lot of work and then planning overnight. So actually this leads you to the idea of how long do you need. So I think a lot of international cases, it's about that investment once people have got on a plane and traveled. So these clients did, they stayed another day, and then they did work overnight on the kind of PR statements, drafting things, and then came back next day, and a lot of the next day was working through how the whole thing was going to be consolidated. So, and there's what I was working on Tuesday, actually there's more work to be done. So we got a framework for intervening work that's going to happen now over the next 2 weeks, because there's third parties, and that often happens in international cases. There might be a state enterprise, there might be a bank, there's just something else that is not at the mediation table. but we have a real good program of work that's going to take place over a period of weeks, and we have a very clear framework for what the clients expect from each other, and also critically how they're going to communicate with each other. So that's, I think as a mediator, you can't just let people kind of just walk out. You really do need to be very clear with them and manage their expectations so that they have got a good way forward and come back to you as a mediator to help them and support them when they go forward.
And in terms of the types of cases reflecting on types of cases that you've mediated, and then thinking about the opportunities in this area of international mediation, any reflections on where you think the opportunities really lie to further develop this?
Well, it's really funny because the people I was working with, I got such a surprise, but the people I was working with on this week, at the end of the mediation, the client said to me, so there were many people who would be in this position, so I can probably comment, he'd been on the CEDA training course. So I said, well, wow, that's amazing. And I had kind of thought halfway through the mediation when he said something, I thought, this guy's quite savvy. He was a savvy negotiator, but he seemed to have extra layers. So that was a lovely surprise. But what I was talking to him about, and I think I talk to a lot of international clients about, is you can come with your business dispute, come early to engage with a process like this. You don't need to be at the back end of an arbitration. You really invest in the day, and work with people who this is what they do, this is their day job, will have deep respect for you. So I'd see an enormous capacity for basically improving the quality and the framework for businesses to negotiate. We're using mediators and using the process, and I think incredibly cost effectively.
I think as we see business people engaging more at the dispute end, I think that's seeing the possibilities of using it more front end, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think it's really important that they feel that, as I said to the clients the other day, I'm here as a mediator not to block your negotiations. Yeah. I'm not here as a blocker. I'm here to basically respect you, but to create an environment where, in fact, you will have a better negotiation. And that's one of the other clients said at the end of the day, gosh, we'd never have got this far without you in the process. So it's about people understanding how the process will create a bridge for much more effective dialogue, but create safe spaces for them. It's great environments where they can manage difficulties and then get back around the table. So I really do see the scope for what we do, James, what you and I do and our colleagues do, that we can really work with business. And I know you've done a lot of work all around the world, so I see a fantastic opportunity for us to work with business.
If we're thinking about those clients and their lawyers representing them, if you were going to give them a few top tips if they were convinced to try mediation in an international context, what would be your top tips to the clients and their lawyers in terms of engaging in the process?
Bring a good team. So, always bring a good team. Yeah, you bring the people who really have got the authority. If you've got an issue with that, then be transparent about it. I think that's really important. And come with optimism, but realism.
It's your point that they've got to invest in the day, so they're absolutely the top team there, right? Yeah,
bring the top team and kind of work on your numbers, work on the issues, really understand the deadlock before you come. And make sure that your mediator, get he or she gets their information, because they will be interested. They really helpful for them to know how the deadlock came about. They can get a bit of the backstory. Ideal if they can speak with a mediator. In most cases, we end up just speaking with the lawyers, which can be very helpful. The lawyers I was working with the other day were both excellent. They really work well with their clients. So I think with the lawyers, my tips would be, listen. Let your clients engage, support your clients, and particularly supporting them around the drafting of any settlement agreement. But work with the client really, and work with the mediator. So develop a good relationship with the mediator.
And one of the things that always comes up in the context of an international case is, and there's different ways that's done around the world, is this idea of joint meetings and separate private meetings. Yeah. Do you have any reflections on what your practice is in terms of that mix in an international context?
So in an international context, it's really important. I was thinking about my clients who came in from, South America and Mexico, Middle East. And I don't think any of those clients had a mediator before. Yeah. So I had to spend, there's no way we're going to have any working sessions until they haven't met me before. We're meeting in some hotel. We need to develop some relationship with each other. So spending times with the teams, but at the same time, importantly, have an icebreaker session, so don't leave people just sitting there. So I mean, in that situation, I've made sure all the business people, we had an icebreaker session, a coffee, a chat, then a breakouts. Then I spent time with each team talking about the negotiations and how they may want to work, and then how we'd go forward into the working sessions. And that gives them confidence to set agendas with you and then to move forward. So, it's just about setting up a good process, but working very closely with the clients.
And maybe finally, just to wrap things off, because it's been an interesting conversation, for the mediators out there, any sort of one piece of advice for mediators who are engaged in or want to get engaged in these types of cases?
I think my advice would be to not so much, don't think about the law, think about the business. Think about the business and about the people, because these fantastic disputes, I've never found, whether it's governed by Italian law or it's something going on in Ukraine, that's never the issue. It's never the issue. The issue is always about the business and what's driving the business deadlock.
Well, I think that's a good piece of advice. Focus on the business rather than the law.
Yeah.
Eileen, thank you very much for sharing your reflections with us.
Well, thank you for talking to me.
Thanks.
Pleasure.